just to, have some sort of good thing to say at the beginning. I was joking with your principal earlier, and I've known Mr. Schaefer for quite a number of years. I can tell you all kinds. If you want any dirt on your principal, the intel is here. But I grew up in Boulder, and I like to tell people I grew up behind enemy lines. I was almost born in the back of a 1963 Plymouth Fury with vinyl seats because all the roads were blocked by Vietnam War protesters. I was actually born in an elevator. So from day one, I had this affinity against communists. I don't know what it was. Couple that with my mother escaped from Latvia at the end of World War II, and it was interesting sitting in on the class today when they were discussing gun control. Because my mother tells me over and over again, one of the first things that the Soviets did when they came into her country is said, give us all your guns, we'll help you, we'll protect you. And within a matter of months, those guns were turned against them, and my mother and her family literally escaped with the clothes on their back. It took them several years to get through Europe and through Ellis Island. So it's an honor to be here. Just the name of your school is inspiring to me. And what you all are studying and competing for and arguing for and processing through and using critical thinking to analyze is inspiring to me. So my hat's off to you, and it's an honor to be here today. Patriotism, I've been thinking about this for several weeks, and honestly, I don't really know what I'm going to say today because I've processed through just the concept of what is patriotism. And there's academic definitions of patriotism, but when you go beyond the academic, and we need the academic, we need definition. Words are good, words mean things. But when we get to the end of that, what is patriotism? It's hard to define. Some people define it as, I love my country. And that certainly can be part of the definition. I found one other technical definition of a zealous love for your country. But I've come to learn over the years, and especially in my job in the military, that zeal alone really doesn't mean anything. The terrorists on 9/11 who drove those airplanes, who hijacked those airplanes, had plenty of zeal, plenty of passion. But they were passionately wrong. And so what is patriotism? I think it's more than that. Here stateside, I see patriotism when people stand when the national anthem is played. When you go to a rodeo and the flag goes by and every single person stands and puts their hand on their heart. I start to see what what patriotism really is. But I think it's more than that, because you could go through the actions of placing your hand over your heart at the Pledge of Allegiance or standing when the flag goes by. But I think it's more than that. I think that there's an undying love. Let me give you an illustration. Let's say you go home with a bad report card. Raise your hand if you've ever gone home. No, I'm just kidding. Don't put your hand. No. Wow. There's a lot of... Is that one class you were telling me about? No, I'm kidding. But if you go home with a bad report card, do your parents love you any less? No. Are they proud of you for that report card? Probably not. And our country is the same way. There's a reason why it's called the experiment of freedom or the experiment of independence. We're going to make mistakes once in a while. But I still do believe, because I've been around the world, I like to say been around the world twice and every Walmart once. Our country is good. Do not believe what the media tells you here. If you want to see what people really think about America, go overseas and ask them, and you'll get a very different picture. I've come to learn that patriotism can't fully be defined by a dictionary. I've come to learn that patriotism is really defined by people. And I don't mean relativism. I mean patriots, individuals. And you all can probably school me in patriots throughout history. But what I wanted to do is just take a few more moments and share with you some of the people that I've known and how I have my definition of patriotism has come full circle. The one thing in all what I have learned is patriotism is more than just love for country. Patriotism cannot exist without freedom. If there's not freedom in a country, it's not patriotism. I would call it nationalism. There are lots of people out there that stick up for their country or like their country or root for their country's soccer team or whatever. But without freedom, I believe that there cannot be true patriotism. And the other thing that I've seen across the board, the common thread that runs through a patriot in their heart is service and sacrifice. Let me give you a couple illustrations. There was a teammate of mine named Michael Mansour. He was a SEAL. And in 2006, he was in a place called Ramadi in Iraq. Anybody ever heard of Michael Mansour? Raise your hand. A couple of people. Mikey and his platoon were out and in a fierce battle in the streets of Ramadi. In fact, the insurgents had nicknamed him the Sheriff of Ramadi. And there was a bounty on his head. If you could kill him, you would get equivalent of 25,000 US dollars. And Mikey and his platoon were out, and they were actually protecting other U.S. forces, other allied forces. And Mikey and his element were up on top of a building giving sniper overwatch, protecting the other soldiers as they went through the city. The fighting became very, very fierce. And all of a sudden, one of the insurgents throws a grenade up on top of the roof. The grenade hits Mikey's body armor, hits his chest, and bounces off and lands right in front of him. His buddies are here, the grenade is here, and the door is there. Mikey had a clear choice at that moment. And Mikey chose to yell grenade and to jump on that grenade, saving all of his friends. Mikey died a short time later. If you ever get the chance to watch the movie Act of Valor, the scene at the end where the guy dives on the grenade, that's a representation of what Mikey Mansour did. He was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. But everybody that knew Mikey just knew that he was about service and sacrifice. Now, a good personal friend of mine, his name was John Tummelson. On August 6th, 2011, a flight named Extortion 17, a CH-47 helicopter full of SEALs, was flying in to a place in Afghanistan to help a whole bunch of Army Rangers that had been, they were engaged in a tremendous fight, and they were in fear of being overrun. And so they dialed 911, and the SEAL team came in. The aircraft was shot down midair. All 25 SEALs, all 38 people on board were killed. And as I sat in your classroom today and listened to the discussion about gun control and gun rights, and as I stand here wearing the Navy SEAL trident, I was standing there for John Tummelson. Because John's passion, if you were ever fortunate enough to be a friend of John Tummelson on Facebook before he passed away, you would know that he fought for the right for every American to defend themselves with any weapon that they needed. He was passionate about that. And so he set out to serve, and he ultimately sacrificed for that right, for you and me, for nothing in return. I actually found a writing. This was from an 8th grade student in North Carolina, and it struck me, and I wanted to share it with you. He wrote, "Patriotism is like a disease that every man carries. It spreads from one soul to the next like an unstoppable fire. There is no cure for such a disease, for this is one of pure determination and pride. Patriotism is in all of our hearts. We may not always know it until the call comes upon us. Patriotism may be a disease, but it is one that no man should have any intention of curing. It brings out compassion, courage, work ethics, and bravery in all. Service and sacrifice." I talked earlier about that element of freedom and why that's so critical. I met a man in the town of Kabul, Afghanistan. There's a street in Kabul that used to be, it's not there anymore. There was a street right after when we went in and drove the Taliban out. The street was called Chicken Street. And it was because while the Taliban controlled Afghanistan, the only thing you could sell on this street was chickens. Well, as soon as the Taliban were driven out, this entire street turned into this free enterprise, free market zone. It was amazing. You could buy anything practically under the sun there. And there was a little shop there that sold Persian rugs. Really neat young man. And his name was Raj. And Raj knew more about economics than any U.S. college student I've ever known, about free market economics. And we would go in there and we would have tea with him and we would talk with him. And I would learn so much from him about economics. Well, at the end of my tour in Afghanistan, I went to the shop. I needed to buy some more things to bring home, souvenirs for family members. And he said, Mr. Mark, why are you buying so many things? And I said, well, Raj, I'm leaving. And he said, well, where are you going? And I said, you know I can't tell you that. Oh, okay. He said, well, where are you going? And this is right when Iraq was spinning up. And I said, well, I can't tell you that either. Of course, I was going home, thankfully, to be with my wife again. He said, oh, okay, I understand that. And all of a sudden, his eyes got as big as dish plates, and something went off in his brain. And he looks around, he looks out his shop door, he looks down the street to make sure no one's hearing him. And he says, you tell Mr. Bush to take B-52 to Iraq and bring them freedom too. And it was amazing to me. And he had a carpet inside of his shop. And it was a carpet of a B-52 bombing Afghanistan. And when I first saw it, I thought, oh my gosh, this is like something I see in Boulder, right? And he explains to me, no, this is good. This is good. Because you understand that without freedom, what they came from was their mothers and their sisters were having their feet cut off in the soccer stadium because they dared to show their ankles. We would find these ladies on the side of the street. We'd drive by in our Humvees, and we knew that we couldn't give them anything. We couldn't give them food, we couldn't give them water, we couldn't give them money, because if the Taliban found out, they'd kill them. That's the oppression that they lived under. And so the B-52 was an act of freedom. It was an act of liberation. Of course, they want their own country. They want to live in peace and freedom. They don't want us to be there forever. On a side note, they were very appreciative of Americans and Brits. Now, if you were involved with the Taliban or you're involved with the drug trade, yeah, you're not going to like the Americans, right? Because we're either going to haul you off to Gitmo or Bagram, or you're not coming off the battlefield. But a vast majority of Afghanis were very appreciative of both the Brits and the Americans for bringing them freedom. Service and sacrifice. And sometimes I think I look at patriotism and it's kind of this nebulous thing, like, wow, I don't really know that, or how do I understand patriotism or whatever. I think the best way for all of us to look at patriotism is to simply look around us. There are heroes all around us. Here stateside, serving overseas, law enforcement officers, first responders. I call law enforcement officers the barbed wire that stand between the sheep and the wolves every single day. And that's why I love being a chaplain with them, to help them. Because it's a tough, tough job. But there's service and sacrifice all around us. There's true patriotism all around us. Let me close with this, and I'm going to embarrass your principal. So if you would please come up. Right after 9/11 happened, your principal was a U.S. congressman. And the very first email, the only email I got post 9/11 in that first day, was from your principal. And the email simply said, Mark, whatever you guys, tell the boys, whatever you guys need, we're going to give it to you. And we read that in the SEAL team. And I shared it with all 6 platoons in the SEAL team. And we knew who was behind us. And we had a job to do. And so I'm going to embarrass him. I've been waiting to do this for 10 years. When I was in Afghanistan, I brought home a coin, a challenge coin. If you know anything about the military, there's challenge coins in the military. And I have been saving this Operation Enduring Freedom challenge coin to be able to present not only to your principal, but to you guys too as a school. And remember, it's patriotism at the core is about freedom. My wife is standing in the back. They're smiling profusely. So the question is, when I was in the military, was it ever so tough that I wanted to give up? Yes, absolutely. If you don't know anything about the SEAL program, it is an all-volunteer program. You volunteer to go in, and you volunteer to get out. And in the initial training, if you've ever seen like Discovery Channel or anything like that, where they show what's called BUDS, or Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training, that's where you'll see the notorious Hell Week, right? I started Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training very confident in myself that I was going to get through this training. 2 weeks into training, we had this 50-foot column of water. It's basically a giant 5-story tower of water. And we do breath holds in it and knot tying and things like this. Well, I was in there doing training one day, and I sneezed, and this blood vessel in my sinus popped, and my mask all fills full of blood. They pull me out, and they send me down to medical, and they run a blood test on me, and come to find out that I'm missing 40% of my red blood cells. I'm anemic. So they pull me out of training, and I'm in the hospital, Balboa Naval Hospital, for 3.5 months. While I was in the hospital, I was isolated in this medical unit, and I distinctly remember this, and I'll never forget it. I was on the payphone with my wife. She had not been able to move out yet. We were married, but she didn't move out yet. So I'm all by myself. And I went on for like 30 minutes about, I don't belong here, and all these guys are Olympic caliber athletes, and I'm in way over my head, and right? And my wife let me, Stephanie is her name, she let me just go on and on and on. And then I stopped, and she waited. To me, it seemed like 5 minutes. It was probably like 5 seconds. And she said the most profound words I've ever heard in my life that come out of a human being. She said, "You really believe for 1 second that God has brought you this far just to fail?" And it was like a spiritual 2x4 upside my forehead, right? Because all of a sudden, and I make no bones about it, but God has given me a deep faith. But she was right. That is not the character of God. That's not who he is. And all of a sudden, now, yeah, I'm on somebody else's plan. And so, yes, I almost quit. And I don't care. You ever talk to anybody that was a real SEAL? Now, there's hundreds of fake SEAls out there. And if you ever have a question, send me their name, and I'll tell you whether or not we'll run them through the database and find out if they're real or not. But if you will never find a real SEAL, if they're being honest. At some point in that training, everyone entertains that idea to quit. The question is, what's here? And most importantly, what's here in your heart? What's driving you? So, great question. Thank you. Yes, sir. Way in the back.
What does it take to be a SEAL?
What does it take to be a SEAL? You have to have a screw loose, but you got to have the right screw loose. It's quite extensive. If you're interested at all, there's a great website. Just Google Navy SEAL training, the official Navy site. It goes through all of that and everything. But in a nutshell, just to qualify, just to get in, the physical aspect is just tremendous. And you're talking to, when I got out of high school, I was 6 foot tall and I weighed 150 pounds soaking wet, right? I was a twig. My mother was terrified when I was going into the Navy to be a SEAL. I never led her in a single sport. The only time I ran is if the police were chasing me. And then it goes more to my testimony of how God carried me through that. But the physical aspect is mandatory. But the physical will not get you, the physical by itself will not get you through. Again, there's something deep down, a core drive that I don't think anybody can be taught or trained into or anything like that. It's something that exists inside of you, and only you know if you have that. I had a guy that met me who was a former SEAL who met me before I went in, and I later found out he was telling all sorts of people that, oh, he'll never make it. There's no way he's never going to make it. And from that, and even today, I mentor young men who are wanting to go in and be a SEAL. And I tell them straight up, look, I can't tell you if you're going to make it or not. Only you can. And probably you're only going to be able to determine that once you get there. So it takes a lot of a very high degree of physical, but a mental and a heart that is just unteachable. Yes, ma'am.
How much can you
How much can you Not as much as I used to be able to, but there's different. it's interesting. I served with guys that were just, I mean, humongous. I mean, they could, bench 400 pounds in their sleep, right? I was never that guy. One of the reasons why everybody always entertains the idea of quitting is because the job of the BUDS instructor, see, every person has a breaking point. I don't care who you are. Every person has a breaking point. And the instructor's job is to figure out what that breaking point is for that individual and make them break. And then see what their reaction is, whether they're going to quit or not. And so for some, the breaking point is lack of sleep. For some, it's lack of food. For some, it's extreme heat. For some, it's extreme cold. My biggest, I was actually a pretty decent runner, so I did okay there. I was an okay swimmer by SEAL standards, but upper body strength was my downfall. Pull-ups, big heavy stuff and all that. That's why they made me a comm guy, a radioman, and I got to carry on my back a lot of radios and laptops and all that type of stuff. So that's why they did that. So good question. Yes, sir.
When did you feel that you were a true patriot?
Wow. When did I feel that I was a true patriot? I don't feel that yet. I mean, I'm being honest. I think I'm growing in that every day. I'm humbled by meeting individuals. Tonight at the Eagles game is the military appreciation night. We're going to honor a prisoner of war from Vietnam who was shot down, spent a bunch of time in the Hanoi Hilton. I'm nervous to meet that guy. I am. I don't know. I think it's an ongoing thing for me. I love this country. It is the greatest country in the world. And I hope I get to continue serving this country some way, some form or another, but I think I'm still growing in that, to be honest. So, good question. Yes, sir. What was the most patriotic thing I did? Oh. Man, these planted questions are what? Stump the speaker time? Gee, I don't know. I have to ask. I don't know. Maybe my wife can answer that. I don't know. I'll tell you one thing that was really rewarding to me. When you guys watch movies, right, and you see, like you watch a World War II movie and the American soldier is handing out a Hershey bar, right, or something like that, it is absolutely true that throughout all the conflicts, all the wars, even today, the American soldier loves children, and the children all around the world know that. In fact, I'll totally deviate from your question if you don't mind, but the Taliban would use this against us. They started using kids to lure us in so that they could ambush us. And one of the scariest moments of my entire life is I was in Afghanistan for 2 days, and I was the new guy who had just come into the compound, into our facility. And so whenever the new guy shows up, it's an unspoken rule. The new guy has to sit in the turret of the lead Humvee, right? The guy up top on the machine gun, because that's the guy that gets shot at the most, right? So the new guy that's his new position. So when I showed up, I got up that morning. It had snowed. It was wintertime in Afghanistan. So I got up and I got the brooms out and I cleared all the snow off the Humvee and I got my machine gun out of the armory and mounted it and everything. We went out and we were actually moving some. Part of our job there was to create the equivalent of like an Afghan Secret Service to protect their president. So we were moving some of our students. And I had learned about how the Taliban were starting to use children to lure. They were basically using our love for kids against us to try and ambush us. So we're driving back to and we're going through this little village, and there's this deep ravine on the right side. It's all dry. I mean, it's 20 feet deep. You can't drive a Humvee down there. And there's this mud wall along our left side, so we're in this kind of channelized area. And there's a couple of holes in the wall. There's a village on the other side of the wall. So we're driving down, and I look down the road.